I don't think nobody has bad things to say about her.
One day after she was shot and killed, those closest to Mariah Samuels created a memorial in her honor. She was a mother of 2 boys and a dog groomer who enjoyed spending time with family and friends.
She loves animals. She loves her son. She was sweet. She was outgoing. She was free-spirited. We loved each other. She's my everything.
Minneapolis police found her shot just feet from her own front door. Samuel's family members believe her ex-boyfriend is responsible for her death. They say she had a restraining order out against him. Less than an hour before she was killed, Samuels wrote on her Facebook page that her ex-boyfriend had threatened her family, damaged her car, and she posted a video that she says shows him hitting her several times.
Take domestic violence seriously. Mm-hmm. Get out of the relationship. Escape.
She posted on Facebook. Hours later, she was dead, shot 15 times outside her home in North Minneapolis. The victim was Mariah Samuels, a 34-year-old mother too. She had done what most people in her position are told to do. She called police. She filed for an order of protection. She warned authorities. But none of it stopped her ex-boyfriend, David Eugene Wright, a man fresh out of prison after serving 15 years. On September 14th, 2025, just days after her last public post, Wright tracked her down. According to court records, he violated protection order, approached her near her Jeep, and opened fire. At least 15 shell casings were recovered at the scene. Neighbors heard the shots. Children were nearby. Wright fled the area on a bicycle. The case raises pressing questions. How could a man with violent history and a recent prison release access a firearm? Why was the order of protection not enough to keep him away? And how many warnings were ignored before the shooting occurred? Investigators quickly charged Wright with second-degree murder and illegal gun possession. But the case is not just about one man and one act of violence. It is about a sequence of events, repeated warnings, and a system that was supposed to protect Mariah yet didn't. In this story, we examine every detail. Who was Mariah Samuels before her death? What was her relationship history with Wright? What exactly happened in the hours and days leading up to the shooting? And what failures in the legal system allowed this to happen? Stay with this case. Every fact matters. Every record tells part of the story. Welcome to Undiluted True Crimes, where real stories meet hard truths. We dive deep into true crime cases solved and unsolved with focus on facts, timelines, and justice. Each episode is created to inform, educate, and honor the voices often forgotten. If you're drawn to raw truth and powerful storytelling, you're in the right place. Subscribe and join us on the path to awareness, only on Undiluted True Crimes. On September 14th, 2025, a sequence of events in North Minneapolis revealed the cracks in a system designed to protect. A 34-year-old mother of 2, Mariah Samuels, was gunned down outside her home. She had reported threats. She called police. She had filed for a protection order. Still, her ex-boyfriend, a man recently released from prison after serving 15 years, found her. Investigators later documented 15 shell casings at the crime scene. This case raises critical questions. How did a mother of 2 end up murdered despite seeking legal protection? How was an ex-convict able to approach her with a firearm so soon after his release? And what structural weaknesses in the justice system does this case expose? These questions form a framework of the investigation into Mariah Samuels' death, an event that challenges assumptions about safety, law enforcement response, and the effectiveness of protection orders. Mariah Samuels was 34 years old. She lived in North Minneapolis with her 2 children. Described by neighbors as consistent in her daily routines, she maintained employment, balanced child care responsibilities, and maintained an active online presence. Her social media posts offered a glimpse into her private life. In the weeks before her death, she posted multiple times on Facebook. Just days before the shooting, she made what would become her last post. It would later draw attention from investigators and the public as a timestamp of her final days. Her life appeared ordinary on the surface, commuting between work and home, caring for her children, and using social media to share updates. But beneath this routine was a history of threats and fear tied to her past relationship with David Eugene Wright. What does it mean when someone does everything right but still isn't safe? Can an online post reveal more than we think about a person's danger or state of mind? The suspect, David Eugene Wright, had a long criminal history. He served 15 years in prison prior to the events of this case. Records indicate his prior convictions involved violent behavior, and his release placed him back into the community with limited oversight. Mariah had previously been in a relationship with Wright. While the full timeline of their relationship has not been disclosed, it ended before her death, and evidence suggests the separation was not amicable. Following their breakup, Mariah reported escalating behavior. Court documents and protection order filings reveal allegations of threats, stalking, and intimidation. The most significant legal step she took was filing for a protection order against Wright. The petition outlined her concerns, including prior harassment and threats to her safety. The order was intended to prevent Wright from contacting her, visiting her residence, or approaching her place of employment. Despite the order, Wright continued to pose a risk. Witnesses and family members reported that violations occurred before the fatal shooting. The order itself, while legally binding, did not prevent Wright from approaching Mariah in person. Does a protection order really protect, or is it just a piece of paper? Why do some abusers escalate when legal action is taken against them? By the way, if you're enjoying this story, you can support the channel with the thanks button below. Every gift helps me keep creating more stories like this for you. In the days leading up to September 14th, Mariah's activities followed routine patterns. She was seen in her neighborhood, at her workplace, and online through her social media presence. During this period, there were indications of continued tension. Court records later confirmed that Wright violated a protection order before the fatal encounter. On the day of the crime, Mariah was near her Jeep outside her residence in North Minneapolis. Witnesses reported hearing multiple gunshots. Police later recovered 15 shell casings at the scene. The evidence confirmed Wright had approached her and fired repeatedly. After the shooting, Wright fled on a bicycle, leaving behind a trail of ballistic evidence and eyewitness accounts. The escape method, unusual for such a crime, added to the detail of the case and aided investigators in tracking him. What was Wright's mindset after serving 15 years in prison? How was he able to obtain a firearm despite his criminal record? Law enforcement responded to the scene within minutes of the shooting. Mariah was pronounced dead shortly after officers arrived. The scene was secured, and investigators began recovering evidence. Ballistic analysis identified 15 discharged shell casings consistent with a semi-automatic weapon. Surveillance cameras in the area provided additional information, capturing Wright's movements after the shooting. Witnesses corroborated the timeline, identifying him as the shooter. Wright was apprehended later that day. He was charged with second-degree murder, possession of a firearm by a prohibited person, and violation of a protection order. His arrest confirmed suspicions that he had violated court orders repeatedly before the shooting. Why wasn't Wright under stricter monitoring after his release? Did the system underestimate the level of risk he posed? This case underscores multiple failures in enforcement and prevention. Protection orders, while legal documents, depend on compliance from the offender and timely response from authorities when violations occur. In Mariah's case, documented violations did not lead to immediate action. Law enforcement agencies face resource challenges, and response times often depend on severity and immediacy of reported threats. In this instance, the gap between Mariah's filing of protection order and her eventual murder demonstrates the limits of the system's ability to prevent escalation. Her case fits into a broader pattern. Nationally, domestic violence homicides frequently involve victims who have previously filed for restraining or protection orders. The presence of such an order often indicates high risk, yet enforcement varies by jurisdiction. Should there be stricter monitoring for offenders with violent criminal histories? Is the justice system reactive rather than preventive? Wright's first appearance in court followed shortly after his arrest. He faced multiple felony charges, including second-degree murder. Prosecutors outlined the evidence: 15 shell casings, eyewitness testimony, protection order violations, and his prior criminal record. His defense at this stage was limited. The weight of the evidence and his documented history of violence presented significant challenges. Bail was denied due to flight risk and danger to the community. As the case moved forward, prosecutors emphasized the role of protection order and the failure of enforcement. The court proceedings highlighted both the brutality of the crime and the gaps in systemic protection. Will this case influence legislative reforms around domestic violence protections? Can one conviction lead to changes in how courts enforce restraining orders? Following Mariah's death, community members organized vigils and marches. Advocacy groups used her case to call for reforms, demanding stronger protection for domestic violence victims. Her family publicly stated that she had followed all the recommended steps, yet the system still failed. The incident became part of a larger conversation about the effectiveness of protection orders, the release and monitoring of violent offenders, and the accountability of law enforcement when victims seek help. How many similar cases exist where warnings were ignored until tragedy occurred? What additional measures are needed to ensure real safety for victims of abuse? The murder of Mariah Samuels illustrates a sequence of documented warnings, legal filings, and protective measures that ultimately failed. A mother of two, a protection order in place, and a known violent ex-partner all combine into a case that exposes weaknesses in the justice system's response to domestic violence. The central questions remain: how effective are current protective measures? How can the system prevent, rather than respond to, such crimes? And what reforms are necessary to ensure that cases like Mariah's are not repeated? In the days leading up to September 14th, 2025, Mariah Samuels maintained a presence on social media. On Facebook, she documented her thoughts and routines, and one of her final posts referenced her ongoing struggles with safety and her concern about being targeted by her ex-boyfriend, David Eugene Wright. Investigators later confirmed that Wright had been monitoring her activities despite being under a court-issued order of protection. Police records indicate that in the week prior, Samuels had contacted law enforcement more than once to report suspected violations of that order. Neighbors also recalled seeing Wright in the vicinity of her home, although no arrest was made during those instances. These reported sightings, paired with Samuels' official filings, demonstrate repeated violations that went unenforced. On September 14, 2025, events escalated. Samuels returned to her home in North Minneapolis. The location was a residential area lined with single-family houses, children playing outdoors, and neighbors frequently present. Her Jeep was parked nearby, which became the site of the shooting. At approximately 6:30 p.m., Wright approached her. Eyewitnesses later described the encounter as sudden. Without any warning, gunfire erupted. Forensic teams recovered 15 shell casings from the ground near the Jeep, each discharged from the same firearm. Samuels was struck multiple times before collapsing near her vehicle. After the shooting, Wright did not leave in a car or on foot. Instead, he fled the area using a bicycle, a detail noted in both the criminal complaint and local reporting. This method of escape temporarily allowed him to blend into the neighborhood environment before law enforcement identified him as the suspect. What was Wright's mindset coming out of prison after 15 years? How was he able to move freely and access a gun? Police responded immediately after receiving multiple 911 calls from neighbors reporting gunfire. When officers arrived, they located Samuels near her Jeep with multiple gunshot wounds. Medical responders confirmed she was deceased at the scene. The medical examiner's autopsy report later confirmed the cause of death as multiple gunshot wounds, consistent with the 15 shell casings found on site. The number of entry wounds indicated intent to kill rather than intimidate. Crime scene technicians cataloged all recovered evidence. The casings were collected for ballistic testing, which confirmed they had been fired from a single semi-automatic weapon. Surveillance footage from nearby homes and street cameras captured partial sequences of Wright's approach and his escape by bicycle. Eyewitness statements were recorded, including descriptions of Wright's clothing and the moments leading up to the attack. Within hours, investigators identified Wright as the prime suspect. His history with the victim, the ongoing order of protection, and the prior police reports all pointed to him. Law enforcement tracked his movements, and within 2 days, he was located and arrested. The arrest was conducted without incident, and Wright was transported to jail pending formal charges. Prosecutors quickly filed 3 counts against him. 1, second-degree murder for the intentional killing of Samuels. 2, illegal possession of a firearm, as Wright was barred from owning or handling guns due to his felony record. 3, Violation of protection order, documented by his direct approach and attack on Samuels despite the standing court order. Why wasn't Wright being monitored more closely as a recent release from prison? Did the system underestimate the risk he posed? The killing of Mariah Samuels highlights several systemic failures that extended beyond a single act of violence. First, there are gaps in enforcing protection orders. While Samuels had taken the legal steps to secure one, records show that Wright violated the order multiple times before the shooting. Each violation was an opportunity for intervention that did not materialize into protective action. Protection orders rely on enforcement, and in this case, enforcement lagged. Second, resources for domestic violence victims are limited. While some jurisdictions maintain rapid response teams or monitoring systems for high-risk cases, evidence shows that Samuels did not receive heightened protection despite repeated reports of danger. The system's dependence on the victim to consistently report and follow up placed an additional burden on someone already under threat. Third, police follow-up is critical in such cases. When Samuels called police to report violations, the urgency with which those reports were acted upon is unclear. Delays in investigation or lack of immediate arrest can embolden offenders who believe the consequences for violations will be minimal. In this instance, those gaps created opportunity for Wright to continue approaching Samuels. This case is not unique. Similar cases exist where victims filed restraining orders, contacted authorities, and still ended up murdered by their abusers. Statistics confirm that protection orders are frequently violated and that the risk of lethal escalation remains high. The broader question this raises is whether the legal system operates in a reactive mode rather than a preventive one. Only after a violation escalates into violence does the full weight of the system respond. In Samuel's case, that response came after her death. Should there be stricter monitoring for offenders with violent pasts? Is the legal system reactive instead of preventive? After the arrest of David Eugene Wright, the case moved quickly into the courtroom. At his first appearance before a Hennepin County judge, Wright was formally charged with second-degree murder and illegal possession of a firearm. Prosecutors also added counts related to the violation of an active protection order, citing court records that Mariah Samuels had successfully obtained legal restrictions against him prior to her death. The issue of bail was raised early. Prosecutors argued that Wright's extensive criminal history, including a 15-year prison sentence, combined with the seriousness of the charges and the evidence of flight after crime, made him a significant danger to the community. They requested that he be held without bail, or at the very least, set at an amount so high it would effectively ensure his detention until trial. The judge agreed with the prosecution's assessment, and Wright was ordered to remain in custody. The defense, while limited in its arguments at this early stage, questioned whether Wright had premeditated the act or whether it could be argued under a different degree of homicide. Public defenders raised concerns about ensuring a fair trial due to the extensive local media coverage of the case. The prosecution's evidence was extensive. Crime scene investigators had collected 15 discharged shell casings near Samuel's vehicle. Witness accounts placed right at the scene in video surveillance showed him fleeing on a bicycle shortly after the gunfire. Digital records confirmed repeated violations of protection order, demonstrating a pattern of stalking behavior. Prosecutors also planned to introduce prior abuse claims made by Samuels, along with documentation of her earlier police reports. The hearings remain ongoing. Pre-trial motions include whether Wright's prison record and past violent conduct can be introduced to the jury, and how much weight should be given to the order of protection violations. The defense has requested to exclude certain details as prejudicial, while prosecutors argue they are central to understanding the threat level Wright posed. Will this case lead to real consequences beyond one conviction? Could legislative reforms emerge from Mariah's death, addressing the weaknesses of current protection orders? The immediate aftermath of Mariah's death extended beyond the courtroom. In North Minneapolis, community vigils were held at the site of the shooting. Residents placed candles, flowers, and written notes near her vehicle where the incident occurred. Local advocacy groups organized marches calling for greater accountability in domestic violence enforcement. Her family spoke publicly, stating that Mariah had done everything she was advised to do under the law, yet still was not safe. They emphasized that this case illustrated a gap between legal paperwork and real-world protection. The family's demand was clear: improve systems for monitoring individuals with violent criminal records, especially those recently released from prison. Domestic violence advocacy groups seized the moment to push for policy reforms. Proposals include the use of GPS monitoring for high-risk offenders, faster police response protocols for repeated order protection violations, and stronger firearm restrictions for individuals with prior felony convictions. Organizations argued that Mariah's case was not isolated, but part of a pattern where victims rely on orders of protection that often fail when offenders choose to ignore them. The broader conversation shifted toward the limitations of legal tools like restraining orders. Experts noted that while protection orders can create legal consequences after violation, they do not physically prevent an abuser from approaching or harming a victim. Several state lawmakers referenced Mariah's case in early discussions about drafting tighter domestic violence legislation in Minnesota. National media coverage highlighted the case as an example of systemic shortcomings. Editorials questioned whether law enforcement had adequate resources to monitor offenders who pose known risks. Legal analysts pointed out that the overlap between domestic violence, firearm access, and criminal reentry continues to challenge courts and communities alike. How many more cases like this are hidden until tragedy strikes? What does true safety look like for victims of abuse? The story of Mariah Samuels and David Eugene Wright ends with a straightforward set of facts. A mother of two sought help from the system. She called police. She obtained a protection order. She warned of the danger she faced. Despite those steps, she was located by her ex-partner and shot 15 times outside her home. Evidence shows Wright's repeated violations of the order, the presence of a firearm he was legally barred from possessing, and a criminal history that raised clear red flags. The system in place designed to protect victims of domestic violence was not enough. This case leaves critical questions unanswered. What reforms are necessary to ensure that protection orders are more than symbolic? How should law enforcement balance resources between responding to immediate threats and monitoring high-risk individuals? Should offenders with violent past face stricter controls upon release, particularly concerning firearm access? The central failure remains clear. A woman followed every legal step available, yet the system could not prevent her death. What changes should be made to prevent another case like Mariah's? Should domestic violence laws shift from reactive enforcement to proactive prevention? Can one conviction change a system that has allowed similar cases to happen repeatedly? Thank you for watching. This case is still raising many questions, and your thoughts are important.